Will we have bionic arms? It's a great question. In fact, if any of you are a sci-fi nerd like me, you may be thinking to yourself, what would it be like to one day have the bionic arm like the Winter Soldier? Or what might we have? Well, on today's episode, we're going to meet Tyler Hayes, who's the founder of AtomLimbs. And although he's not a modern author, I think he's a modern creator that we can learn from. AtomLimbs is really a cutting-edge biotechnology and robotics company helping work to create bionic limbs. And what's interesting about what I love about Tyler and his story is that at the core of it, he's building a community. He's raised millions and millions of dollars for this somewhat crazy idea that he found on the shelves in Johns Hopkins laboratories that no one was working on, picked it up, and has created a community that he believes is going to change the lives of millions of people, veterans, and beyond. But at the core of it is really understanding of why it matters to build a community. And I think if you're writing a book, if you're creating a YouTube channel, or if you're trying to build a company, today it's not just about the product. It's about the people. And I think we talk about that, what it's like to be open, vulnerable, how to share, and how to think about being a modern creator today and a modern author. If you've ever thought about how do you wind up building an audience for something, how do you get people involved, how do you ask for money from people, you'll learn a lot on this episode. It's one of those things that both is inspiring and instructive for anyone who's thought, could I actually get people to give me money to pursue my dreams? You'll see if you have a mission as big as AtomLimbs and Tyler, you can too. Enjoy.
I furiously believe in building in public. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean give away everything, keep the secret sauce, but it does mean the old way of building companies up until the 20th century was have an idea, make a business plan, maybe get some money, sell the product, pursue sales, do marketing. Mm-hmm. If you want to do any kind of advertising, you do it on billboards or TV or radio. Right. Cool. Totally worked for a long time. Now in the 21st century, like that script has been entirely flipped. So now it's if you have an audience, and this was somewhat true in the 20th century, if you have an audience, you can sell them kind of anything. And this is why you see so many people trying to get huge audiences on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube and TikTok and everywhere else. And then they monetize those things.
In 2004, DARPA started funding a program called Revolutionizing Prosthetics. The goal was to build a robotic hand that could completely restore arm function for amputees returning from war. And this is needed because most prosthetics require you to do things like move the thumb and touch the button on the back of the hand and just use specific grips. It's so bad that nearly 40% of amputees just don't even use a prosthetic. And so Johns Hopkins took this funding from DARPA, which was nearly $120 million in total, and went through prototype after prototype after prototype until they could control individual fingers. And instead of clicking a button, you wear a band around your muscles, which then senses neural activity in your muscles and converts it into hand movement. Now, sadly, DARPA stopped funding this a few years ago, so the technology was in danger of being left in the lab. But luckily, my friend Tyler had just sold his startup to Amazon for $25 million.
As a hobby, that just morphed into becoming my full-time, interests as I got older. And so then I started companies and I studied neuroscience when I was in school. I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. That was the job that I thought I was going to do the rest of my life. I moved out from Minnesota to San Francisco about 10 years ago, and then joined a rocket ship startup when I came out here called Discuss. And then, was early there right after they got out of Y Combinator, and then started my first startup, which was in healthcare called Prime, which helped people aggregate their medical records. And we partnered with 23andMe and UCSF and stuff to help people get their medical data. And then sort of more notoriously, the past several years before AtomLimbs, was co-founder of Bebo, which is actually the same Bebo that used to be a social network a long time ago.
That's right.
Originally got bought by AOL for $1 billion, and then we bought it back for $1 million. So it was like the greatest business deal of all time, basically. And then we sold it again to Amazon a couple of years ago. And then, last couple of years have been all around AtomLimbs. Every other one of the companies I've been a part of, we've always just basically said, everyone's a problem solver inside the organization. Focus is the ultimate weapon that a startup has, all the way up to, Apple is the biggest startup in the world. Every distraction that enters into the workforce, into your day, is ultimately the thing that why most things take a long time. We have a lot of institutional frameworks inside of AtomLimbs for all these cheat codes we can use. It's one of them is we have this thing called the 20-80 rule, which is if like you're never allowed to go off and do something on your own completely and then just come back and like deliver, oh, here is the new robotic design, or here is the new AI algorithm. You have to basically get to 20%, then come back to everyone and say, hey, I got about 20% in. What do you think so far? And, you know, as the saying goes, like an inch now is a mile later. If you were on this path and you needed to be on this path, then like we just stopped you from going down the wrong path until you got to the finish line. And then you can deviate and come back. In Silicon Valley, there's these, you know, startups and venture capitalists who invest in those startups. Right. And I think what most people think about when they think about venture capitalists as investing in startups is like, oh, they're funding Uber and Google and PayPal and everything else. We have about a 50-50 funding strategy, which is like 50% of our funding, for example, comes from the government through all sorts of grants, which is not normal for startups. Right. At least that's how people don't think of it. And then the other 50% comes from, you know, private investors, whether that's angels, VCs, family offices, whoever. Yeah. Tesla and SpaceX have both taken on some of the largest government loans and grants of all time. Speaking of secrets, I'll never forget the first day I walked through the applied physics lab at Johns Hopkins. And I swear to God, it was like walking through a Marvel supervillain lair. It was like, there's like an exoskeleton, there's a robotic arm, there's like a human hawk costume that can fly. The arm that we're making, when it was in R&D there, I was myself angel investing in longevity companies. My thesis was basically, there's a lot of people doing this like reverse aging through pills and therapies and stuff. And my thesis was like, I think we just need to rebuild the human body. Like, even if someone gives you a pill and it stops your aging, you're still stuck in a meat sack. Yeah. Like, you can still be damaged or killed. That seems flawed. Okay, so what if we replace the human body? I literally went to like Johns Hopkins .edu or whatever, and they just like found a phone number and just cold called it. It was like, hey, I saw this video. Like, who do I talk to? And I like got transferred like 3 different departments, and then finally ended up talking to what turned out was their tech transfer office. Which, if people don't know about this, there's an entire department at all these big universities whose sole responsibility is to move that that tech out of the university. And I just literally tried to help them find a team to commercialize it. They sort of had a few false. I furiously believe in building in public. And that doesn't mean give away everything, keep the secret sauce, but it does mean the old way of building companies up until the 20th century was have an idea, make a business plan, maybe get some money, sell the product, do sales, do marketing. If you want to do any kind of advertising, you do it on billboards or TV or radio. Right. Cool. Totally worked for a long time. Now in the 21st century, like that script has been entirely flipped. So now it's, if you have an audience, and this was somewhat true in the 20th century, if you have an audience, you can sell them kind of anything. And this is why you see so many people trying to get huge audiences on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube and TikTok and everywhere else. And then they monetize those things. One of my co-founders from Bebo, Sean, he like started this podcast called My First Million. And like, he got like 100,000 listeners or something like that. And now he's got like, he turned those 100,000 listeners into a $2.5 million rolling fund that he started. Now he's investing money. You know, we've raised almost $1 million publicly just through that one campaign now. Right. And that was way more than I expected. And so I was like, well, okay, maybe there's like actually a new thing here. So I will say that behind the scenes, I'm actually talking to some of these different platforms like WeFunder and some of the others, as well as some of the companies I've invested in. So like the more you read, the better you're going to think. The more you think, the better you're going to write. The more you write, the better you're going to think. Having to write every day forced me to be extremely clear with my thinking so that I could convey it through words. If you need to write a book, start writing the book. If you need to start a company, start the company, right? Like, and the act of basically moving forward is the thing that continues to deliver progress. Motion, not direction. So like, if you're on an island in the middle of the ocean and you don't know how to get back to like, you know, your main digs, well, how do you do that? Well, a lot of people would be like, I'm going to look around and I'm just going to look out in the ocean, and you're not going to see anything. You're on an island. So what you need to do is just press out. And then as you start taking the, you know, those steps into the ocean, you will start to see more, but you won't have ever seen those things if you stayed on the island. When you turn 22, you have about 12,000 waking days left in your life. When you turn 30, you have about 10,000 waking days left. Wow. So a waking day would be like 16 hours, pull 8 from the next day because you're sleeping.
Yeah.
But 10,000 waking days, you turn 30, that rolls over to 4 digits, 9,999. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948, it sort of said like, guarantees access to education, healthcare, and blah, blah, blah. To me, that's kind of, that's what I'm talking about. It's like, hey, I think that making toys is great. Let's keep doing that. But for right now, there's like very clear problems that still exist with poverty and access to shelter and homelessness and justice reform and education and healthcare. And it's not just in the US, it's all over the world. And so like, I'm just going to keep working on that. Like basically get my house in order before I go and try to build another house. And the house just happens to be planet Earth. So I think for me, that's how I think about it. But I will say that everyone has a very different sense of what is meaningful. And I wouldn't suggest anyone redefine it. If it's meaningful to you, it's meaningful. And if that's making a fintech product, great. If it's writing a book, great. If it's just becoming a sculptor for the next 20 years and, not knowing where your next paychecks come from, great. Just like do that. Don't be a stranger is like the number one rule. Just slide in my DMs. I think for me, the biggest thing that opened my eyes when we were working with Bebo and we had to work with a lot of big influencers like Twitch and YouTube and stuff was, again, the audience thing. Like content is great, but content only matters if you have distribution for that content.